Thank you. Members, you are welcome. We are going to begin. It's already 6 p.m. I wanted to invite Barbara to give a brief talk, intro, and then we set off. I'm waiting for Barbara.
Okay, thank you so much, Nelson. I am Barbara Emolot, who is leading the Ethics of Learning project, and I am excited for this panel, which has a great lineup of panelists that are going to discuss that are going to discuss curatorial practice in museology and restitution. So we have Syokau Mutonga, Dr. Goodman Gwasira, and Kitaulwa Abraham Kigenyi, and I'm sure that they will give themselves better introductions so that we can get to know more about them. Right now, let me hand over to Nelson, who will now officially start the panel. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, members who are on the in the online. I hope more will be joining us. I try to share the online Zoom link with colleagues. Colleagues, today with us, we are in the continuation of this 1 month process, which has been on restitution. And there was an exhibition which was opened. It got me out of the country. I'm back, but I will be in the next either tomorrow or Friday. I should be at the gallery. You recall in 2014, Uganda received 39 our heritage cultural properties from UK, University of Cambridge, and I was part of the team. We are today going to discuss about curatorial practice in museology and restitution. The key question is, how does curatorial practice inform the work of museums towards the restitution process? And with us, we have experts, Dr. Goodman Gwasira. He will introduce himself more, but he's a senior lecturer for Archaeology and Heritage, University of Namibia. He has worked with the government of Namibia, Ministry of Education, Arts, Culture and Sports. He has worked with the museums, and he's an expert in Africa who has trained a lot of people. We have also with us Ms. Syokau Mutonga, who works with Open Restitution Africa. The office is based in Johannesburg, and it is led by women. Currently, she's based in Denver, that is in the US, but she'll talk much about it. And then we have with us again, Ibra, he's a prince, Ibra Kitaulwa, and these are experts in the field of museum. He focuses on community museum. And all these people want to share with us. For me, I'm a curator at the Uganda Museum and worked for more than 15 years. I will be sharing with you more by the experience we brought in the artifacts from Cambridge, but I'm not going to talk much. We want to hear from our experts. Would you like to invite Dr. Goodman to introduce himself, followed by Syokau and Kitaulwa, and then after that we'll go for their panel talk. You can introduce what you do, where you come from, and you can tell us the members on the line. Thank you.
Well,
Goodman, you're welcome.
Yes, thank you very much, Nelson. Good afternoon, good evening. I'm saying good afternoon because in Namibia it's still afternoon. But good evening and good morning, depending on where you are following from. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this panel discussion for this wonderful opportunity to share experiences and also to learn and think together. As Nelson has introduced me, my name is Goodman Gwasira. I'm from the University of Namibia, where I'm teaching and researching archaeology and heritage studies. In addition to this, I also manage the Heritage Conservation Laboratory at the university here, and I coordinate the Museum Outreach Program or the Heritage Outreach Program in our department. This is a program that seeks to use returned cultural possessions in schools, and it also tries to open up museum objects to schools, particularly primary and secondary schools, and to use these ones as teaching aids, and also to stimulate the interest and thinking of young minds in our schools here. As far as restitution is concerned, I was involved in a program of restituting cultural possessions from the Berlin Ethnological Museum, which was part of a broader project that is known as Confronting Colonial Pasts, Envisioning Creative Futures. And my presentation today will be based more on that particular project because I think it ushers in a different way of thinking about restitution in a very creative way, and also in a way that we can make restitution useful to the communities and to the museums. I'll also talk a bit, maybe just briefly talk about some the repatriation of human remains to Namibia that has taken place in the past. I've also been involved in a project that it was a summer school between the University of Tübingen and the University of Namibia, but also organized around the restitution of cultural possessions from the Linden Museum in Stuttgart. Currently, I'm working with a team of the government team to prepare for the repatriation and restitution of ancestral remains from the Iziko Museum in South Africa. Now, before I end my introduction, I would like to make a disclaimer that the views that I will be presenting today and that I'll be expressing do not at all represent the views of my employer, and I am not speaking for the government of Namibia or on behalf of the government of Namibia. I don't have the mandate to do that in this particular space today, but I will be presenting my views that are based on observations, research, and personal experiences regarding restitution, repatriation, and restitution processes that have taken place in Namibia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Goodman, for that elaborate introduction. I think members can now feel comfortable to hear from him. Let's go to Ms. Syokau Mutonga. Please, you can introduce yourself briefly, and then you'll come to the introductions, to the presentation later. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Syokau Mutonga, and I work at Open Restitution Africa as a research and operations associate. I have a background in anthropology and archaeology, and in the past decade, I have worked in public spaces like archives, libraries, and museums, seeing how to make them more inclusive for the different diverse publics that our African cities have. And my work at Open Restitution Africa involves supporting the research team to collect information or data on how Africans have been doing restitution, how they have been demanding for the return of their belongings and human ancestors, and what insights we can pull from all this information so that we support any person, especially Africans, who are seeking to see the return of their belongings and human ancestors. And today I will talk about some of that work and some of the insights that we have put out as Open Restitution Africa and how this has supported Africans in particular. Thank you very much, Nelson.
Thank you, Syokau, for the introduction. I think your work from Open Restitution is elaborate, and your experience of working in the museums is going to be very strong. Let's hear from Prince Ibra Abraham Stwala, working in the Community Museum. Thank you. Can you introduce yourself? Ebra, introduce yourself.
I see that Ibra has left the chat, I think, but I think he's going to be back.
I hope he's okay. Right. Okay. Right. Maybe is he back? Is he back?
Not yet.
Okay. If he has not joined, maybe we can proceed because of time. I'm going to invite Dr. Goodman to talk to us briefly in addressing one of the questions. You spoke to us your work which you are doing as a teacher, working the heritage sector and taking the museum objects to the communities and especially to schools, especially in Namibia, and your work of returning the ancestral remains from German and from the museums and working with the government. Can you tell us more about your experience of curatorship, the work, and what challenges you experience, and what measures have you taken in your institution to address some of these concerns you dwell with in Restitution? Thank you.
Sorry, Goodman, I believe you're on mute.
Is Goodman on?
Thank you very
he has
much,
also dropped.
Syokau. You know, I think when I switched on my camera, I thought I switched on everything. But thanks very much. Now, okay, so basically what I was saying is that.
All right, sorry.
Yeah,
okay.
It's okay. I think you can hear me now, is it?
Yes, please.
Good. Yeah, no, so basically what I was saying when it was muted is the fact that we have observed that there seem to be some challenges that are common amongst different institutions. So, but basically in our work here in Namibia, and particularly at the university, one of the biggest challenges that we've faced when it comes to restitution has been the fact that it has been done in an ad hoc manner. Namibia has got a very long history of repatriations, and some of them, they go back to before independence. But there was quite a very strong impetus from after independence in 1990 to locate, reclaim, and repatriate Namibian cultural objects and even human remains. But this has been done outside a framework of a policy. And this has been our biggest challenge, because so far what we have seen is the fact that there are institutions that are holding Namibian ancestral remains and also cultural possessions that really want to repatriate them to Namibia. But then in the absence of a framework such as a policy and also guidelines, that is to a certain extent hampered our progress. But at the same time, this, what we see as a challenge, has been also an advantage because it has allowed for repatriation and restitution of material culture from particularly countries such as Germany without really the restrictions of a policy. So in a way, it is a challenge, but it is also if you want, an advantage. But what have we done so far? So basically, in the country, we have started to develop a national policy on the on restitution, repatriation and restitution. These policy and guidelines, we've got a draft policy and guidelines at the moment. And as I am talking, beginning this month is being workshopped and used for consultation around the whole country so that the communities have got an input. What happened is that the draft that I'm talking about was developed, of course, by a team that included academics, museum professionals, community representatives. But now it's time to go to the actual communities and workshop this draft that we've got so that they can give their input into that, so that at the end of the day, we have a policy that is a Namibian policy that also communities, particularly communities of origin, can own. That's part of the one part of the challenge. The other part of the challenge is that we've realized that without knowing what exists in which museums and institutions around the world, it is very difficult for us as a country and for communities in particular to lay a claim. So that's one thing that we really need to do, is to identify what is held in which institutions. And then communities must have access to this particular sort of, if you want, inventory, so that they can identify what they really need in the communities. The challenge that we've had in the past is that if Museum X has got some cultural possessions from Namibia, that museum can decide on its own what they are going to give to Namibia. And yet, in such a case, you realize that maybe what they return is not what is urgently needed in the communities. So it is important for communities to know what exists so that they can actually say, okay, from the whole list that you've got, what is very urgent to us is these objects, because these objects, they help us to revive our own cultures. One example that we've got here is the power stones that were returned from Finland. These power stones, they were actually used to revive a kingdom that had stopped existing in 1917. But when they were brought in here, they were used because the power stone was kept, say, for example, the Ukwanyama kingdom, the power stone was kept by one female leader in that community who would give it. It will be used basically when it comes to installing the king. But since the death of King Mandume in 1917, the kingdom actually kind of died out. But when the power stone was returned, the kingdom was revived, and now they've got a queen that is there. Now, if you take the argument that I had that I presented at the beginning, that if a particular museum does not give us or does not expose what they have, we'll have a situation where some cultural possessions that are not of immediate interest to the communities might end up being returned to Namibia, and they will not really be very useful. So there is an issue of the policy, but there's an issue of us also knowing what exists. So what has happened in the past is that with the support from colleagues from Germany, such as Larissa Foister, they have developed a finding aid of cultural possessions in German museums and in German-speaking museums that are from Namibia. That one is now existing and communities can access it. But we do not have the same for other countries, such as South Africa, for example. So we need to start working on that kind of inventory. These are just some of the challenges that we are facing at the moment. Perhaps I can say more when it comes to the time of discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Goodman, for the elaborate discussion, especially when you said some of these museums in Europe might want to give objects which are not of interest to the Namibian community. There's a need to know what is there and access the right objects to be returned. That brings a revival of the cultural heritage, especially for the communities. I think that's a very key point in restitution. It's not just about dumping physical location of the objects from Europe to Africa, but it is about bringing objects that can make impact to the communities and society we have in the country. Thank you very much. Right now, we're going to go to Ms. Syokau, who works with the Restitution, Open Restitution Africa, and would like to right now hear from her. Ms. Syokau, you as a research and operations associate working with Open Restitution, which is Africa, of which most of the members are women alone, which is also men are marginalized. We are missing in that opportunity, but you can tell us more from your work. How have you influenced, especially the name is Open Restitution Africa, how have you influenced the efforts by African Union on the restitution, especially when African Union made a declaration 2025 about the return of cultural properties back to home? And from your research work, what have you found on the African treasures that have been held outside, especially in Europe, that you think would need? And how have you helped African museums or communities to bring back our cultural treasures? Let's roll to Ms. Syokau Mutonga, who is going to give a presentation. Barbara, maybe would you be able to share her work? Can you give her a link to make a host?
Also,
You can.
I can also, yeah.
All right, try to share. Yeah, if you can share.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes. Yeah, we are seeing it.
All right.
All right, thank you. Yeah, over to you. Thank you.
I don't know what has happened. All right. My name is Syokau Mutonga, like I said earlier, and Open Restitution Africa was started by two women, Molemo Moiloa, who is based in South Africa, and Chao Tayana Maina, who is based in Kenya. And they started it with the goal of understanding that there was very limited information on restitution processes in Africa. And this was hindering Africans from knowing what has been returned, what are the processes and the best practices that we need to take when we are working with museums or even communities when demanding the return of our heritage. And, this is coming in from also since Macron's speech in 2017 about returning belongings. We saw more demands. We saw also with the Benin bronzes, which are the best recorded case of looting, but there's also the Gonzo case in Cameroon. And we were beginning to collect all this information and say, actually, if we get all these people together and record their stories and ask them to tell us the processes that they went through and the successes and the challenges that they faced, we can then begin to have an archive of best practice that other Africans can borrow from. We are a women-led organization, like Nelson has said. It is not intentional in any way. It is just that when the project started, it was the five of us, and we are a fully remote team based in South Africa, in Kenya, the UK, and Denver right now. And how we collect our information is using a grassroots approach, like Goodman has said, just entering the community and that being the place where we start from when collecting information. And we are also building an open data platform, which will Some of it will go live this year and the rest of it will go live next year. And this will be where people can come and see all the data that we have collected and begin to see the insights that we have been putting together the past 5 years. At the same time, we also do quite a bit of public advocacy so that we can engage with general publics on restitution, because we believe that restitution is not just the work of academics or museum workers, it is the work of every person. And coming back to this problem where there was an invisibility of how restitution happens, that most of the African processes where restitution is concerned are usually invisibilized. We don't know, we don't have a centralized place where we can know who is taking part, what is happening, and how long these processes are taking and the challenges that they are encountering. As a result, our African countries lack sufficient data to guide their policy development. That thing that Goodman actually mentioned, that without policy, it is difficult to make progress or to have the gravitas to make the important decisions that we need to make when negotiating with European or American countries. And the second issue we have seen is that Western scholarship and media is what is usually more common. It is more common to cite Western scholars, for example, when writing about restitution, because their publications are more visible than all the Africans working in restitution, whose voices tend not to be as well known. And this continues to perpetuate that historical power dynamic where the West has more power than Africans. So what we have done to challenge that is, one of the things our platform has is something we call a database of African voices working in restitution. And we put that out so that any person who is wanting to know who are the Africans who are working in restitution, can I speak with them? Can I find their work? Then that database is available on our platform. And we have seen more Africans being cited and being consulted when restitution is happening. It's still been a bit slow, but there is progress on that end, and we're pleased about that. And so we have the research that we have done, and our methodology is usually using case studies. The open data platform is going to go live later this year, early next year, and we do quite a bit of advocacy. And if I could just give a little bit of what our methodology is like, is we're working with a conceptual framework of restitution that recognizes African efforts to repair and heal from the spiritual, cultural, and knowledge system ruptures that were caused by colonial violence and looting. And so we are challenging ourselves to generate data from the scant information that is available from the continent by interrogating and analyzing this information from multiple points of inquiry. So we do this by oral histories. We center the voice of the African and how their perspectives on how they went about their cases, and then build this together into case studies. We have 25 case studies from 13 countries in Africa that document restitution journeys of some people it's human ancestors, others it's belongings, others it's spiritually adjacent ancestors like the Vigango. And through all these, we are beginning to see that the work of restitution actually falls heaviest on Africans, and seeing that I'll just come to this, that even the point of locating a belonging or ancestor is very difficult, because museums are usually not, Western museums are not known for being transparent about what they have in their collection. And so we did another report, because some African governments have approached us and asked us, what is one thing we can do to support restitution? And most times what governments do is inventory projects. We have a few that have been done on the continent, and our research was asking, is an inventory project really the best method that African governments should go for when wanting to support restitution processes? And the position we took was that if an African government chooses to commit its limited resources to an inventory project, it should take a demand-based approach, meaning that you start with the community and the community tells you which belongings and ancestors they want back, because we know what we lost, we know what was taken from us. And then that way, if you start from a demand-based inventory, then even the relationship with the European Museum is going to be clearer, because you will say, no, this is not what we want. This is the thing we want. So for example, like for Kenya, asking for the Ngaji drum or asking for Kitaulwa's head. And other forms of advocacy that we do are, we have explainer videos. We recognize that so much restitution information is not, it's not accessible to very many people in the general public. So our explainer videos just break down what is the history of theft, what is the history of Africans asking for demand, what is the history of the excuses that European and Western museums have given when we have demanded our belongings. Where are we now and where are we going? And more we are seeing more people, the power that when people know something, they feel empowered to make more data-informed decisions. So in the past 4 years when we have worked on this project, we have just seen the restitution go from a small number of people knowing about it to a bigger number of people knowing about it. And interestingly enough, with the AU Charter on Restitution that was announced this year, Open Restitution Africa was not invited to contribute to it, which is not a bad thing, but it does speak to the idea that if you centralize data and you make it accessible to people, they can make knowledge-informed decisions. And that really is our joy. So we look forward to seeing what the future of restitution on the African continent is going to be as more Africans have more data to make more decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Syokau, for this elaborate conversation that you have given us. And members, keep your questions tight, but I've learned very strong argument you have made. Restitution is not only the work of academicians and museum curators. Everybody must be involved. There's a need for policy, need for data that will help to negotiate, knowing that where these objects are held, there's no transparency in those European museums. And how do we navigate that space where there's no transparency? I think that's a very important point for us members. Keep your questions, we'll open very shortly. We would like to invite Prince Abraham Kitaulwa. You didn't introduce yourself. You got out of the network. Please introduce yourself brief and then talk about your work with the community museums. There's an argument from Namibia why these objects are brought to the communities. It revives knowledge, it revives cultural heritage, it even helps to re-establish kingdoms that were not being operational. And once the object is brought, and the object enables the kingdom or the chiefdom to be reinstated. I think that's a very important point in regards to community. But tell us about your work. How does your work of the community museums help in restitution, especially in Uganda or Africa, if you are partnered with some other African countries? Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you, Nelson. And I must thank everybody who is on this platform and the discussants, the previous two discussants. I am Kitaulwa Abraham. I happen to be a prince from the royal family of Busoga, one of the biggest tribes in eastern Uganda. I'm the senior curator of Kigulu Cultural Museum, a community museum for one of the 11 chiefdoms that make up Kigulu Busoga Kingdom. I also happen to work as chairperson of the Uganda Community Museums Association, WUKOMA. WUKOMA is an umbrella organization for community museums in Uganda. We formed this association to have one mouth to speak for all the community museums. We do exhibit relevant to the different communities. We also do research on our cultural heritage, especially the intangible cultural heritage. We do promote the ICH, that is intangible cultural heritage, and we have gone ahead to open up heritage clubs in secondary schools, where we assume that our younger ones have separated from their parents, and if they are to learn about their culture, they do it through the heritage clubs. There's a number of booklets for the different community museums. In Uganda, we have around 36 communities, and currently we are running. I'm supposed to talk about the extent to which community museums can contribute to restitution of curatorial heritage properties. I'm sure you are all aware that curatorial practices informs community museums forms part of the restitution by involving the museum curators and spaces in crucial steps like provenance research, that is looking for the origin of the objects, where they investigate the object's history, acquisition, and cultural context to identify claimants and understand ownership. Provenance research allows community museums to re-evaluate their relationship with the objects and the communities from which they originate. Community museums also facilitate ethical dialogue and collaborate with communities, build diverse networks, and re-examine their collections to foster a more just and inclusive approach to cultural heritage preservation. Now, key ways community museums informs restitution. 1, deepening research and documentation. Community museums can ably care for the documentation and interpretation of the collection, which is very essential for the complex provenance research needed to identify the objects and their potential claimants. This involves uncovering overlooked histories and applying diverse investigative methods. I think you are aware that some artifacts may not have the records from where they were picked from, but when we go to community museums, you find that some are already even displayed in our exhibitions. Then the second one is shifting collection knowledge. The process of restitution encourages community museums to move beyond traditional collection narratives to incorporate the perspective of originating communities. This involves understanding the object's cultural significance, which often goes beyond the purely academic. I'm aware that a number of artifacts were taken to you.
Nelson, it seems like Prince
Have we lost
yes, we lost him.
Mr. Kitaulwa him again?
Yeah, we have.
Oh, sorry. Okay, we have lost him. I think where he is in the network, we'll find a way of getting back. All right. I think members we will continue when he gets back. We'll give him chance. We have got a presentation already by Dr. Goodman and Ms. Syokau, who have elaborately explained to us what the restitution is involved in Africa, especially from Namibia. I'm going to open the floor to the members online. If you have a question to ask the panelists, please share your questions, and then I will invite Abraham Stwala later. Thank you. You can also send some of your questions on chat.
I am very sorry, I went off. Hello,
Okay,
everyone.
Abraham, yes, please, can you now summarize in the next 3 minutes so that we give the public online
Yeah,
to
the
ask
third one
questions?
was the third key element is building relationship with communities. Museums play a key role in establishing and maintaining relationship with source communities, fostering dialogue and developing collaboration is. This collaborative approach is crucial for the ethical and successful handling of restitution cases. Then next we look at re-evaluating the collection is. The restitution process requires community museums to re-examine the collection under their care, considering how they were acquired, their origin, and their impact on source communities, especially in the context of colonialism. I cannot forget promoting the ethical dialogue and practices. Community museums' work around restitution can often involve advocating for inclusive terminology and practices to create more transparent and collaborative decision-making processes with communities. Finally, lastly, facilitate the return process. Community museums may also be involved in the practical aspects of restitution, such as negotiating the transfer of your objects and ensuring proper preservation during transit, and creating new ways to present objects in their original context or through the loan agreements. Finally, community museums can help to facilitate the examination of the accession and de-accession process. Here, community museums may be involved in the conversations to determine which objects to remove or include in their accession registers, depending on the nature of conversations in the community. I submit, please.
Thank you, Abraham. I think you have raised a very important technical term here, accession and de-accession of objects that are held in Europe. Through your negotiation, it is being possible. I think from all around the three presentations is that the communities are key in influencing or advocating for the restitution. Of course, one of my questions, which I will raise later, is there's been an argument from most European museums that the diaspora community are part of the communities who also would like to enjoy and experience these objects. So those objects are kept there, important for them. But you are saying the originating communities are very important. Members, if you have questions, you're most welcome. You can raise your hand or you can share on the chat before we give a floor to the panelists to respond in some of the questions you give. Thank you.
I have a question to Syokau. I'm curious to know how can young curators be equipped to handle restitution and ethical provenance work in their careers? And to Dr. Goodman, beyond returning objects, what else needs to be restored? knowledge, narratives, or curatorial authority? Those are my two questions.
For those questions, any other question from any member online, public? Okay, if there's no other question, we can allow the panelists to respond, and then other questions might come later. Yes, Dr. Goodman, please proceed.
Yes, thank you once again. I think it's a very important question to consider because before I answer it, maybe I would like to frame it within the fact that the question that we've raised here points to a very crucial issue regarding restitution. To begin with, there is a conflation between restitution and repatriation. And in some cases, some institutions and countries, they think after repatriation, that is the end of it, and there's no more restitution after that. What we need to realize here is the fact that, and building from the question, basically what it means to me is that there is an understanding that restitution is an ongoing process. And as an ongoing process, then that means there is some afterlife after it. And this is now the question that comes to the issues of what do we do with these material culture when they are returned? How do we make them inform new curatorial practices? Because what we have mainly in our museums is some kind of inherited curatorial practices. And these practices, they tend to perpetuate some coloniality, if we want to be blunt about it. Why do I say this? Is because there's this understanding that museums, as they are in Africa, are foreign institutions. They don't really speak to the people. That is why you get to a point whereby even when the cultural possessions are returned, we need to realize that, first of all, when they left Africa, they were possessions, they were not museum objects. And that is why I've been trying to avoid that term of museum objects. So if we return them and we continue with the colonial curatorial practices that we had, we are in a way perpetuating coloniality because we need to make sure that these collections, if you want, were not museum objects to begin with. There were possessions that had a function within a particular community. And these communities, they had ways of mitigating and what you call curating these particular collections. And I think this is where the work of Aura becomes very important, because then we begin to document these traditional curatorial practices and see how we can integrate them in our museums. That way we make museums more useful to our communities. And this also now speaks to the point of knowledge, because the curatorial practices that we had before did not really consider knowledge from the communities. Such knowledge from the communities was normally considered as unscientific, therefore it cannot enter into the museum. The moment we do that, we are in a way creating some hierarchies of knowledge, whereas the new approach that we are advocating for sees the knowledge from the communities as equally valid, just as the same with what's so-called this scientific knowledge that was generated from these collections that have been returned. So in a way, then, if we are to use the examples that we have here in Namibia, there has been a project which worked with material culture that was returned from the Berlin Ethnological Museum. And that project developed a space for community researchers and community curators to inform the curators within the museums on, number one, how to handle these objects, or if you want, possessions, how to treat them, and even how to conserve them. So there are other colleagues who actually argue that perhaps in some cases we don't even have to conserve and preserve these returned possessions because they had a particular lifespan. They need to die. So perhaps we now don't need to do that. That's a different school of thought. But just to bring it back together, basically what we're saying here is that it is very important that we collect this knowledge within the communities and we make it useful. So the possessions themselves ought to create a space for younger generations to be inspired to be creative. They should be able to use, if it means using so-called modern material to recreate these particular possessions. Maybe I can end by giving an example of what has happened here in Namibia with one of our students who took a possession that was known as just an Ovambo knife in museum terminology, and in their accession books, it was just Ovambo knife. He went into the different communities where these knives were made, and he realized that this is not just an ordinary knife. This is a knife that was used as the seal of the king. The traditional authority would send one person to a different traditional authority, and if that person did not have that particular knife, they were not accepted. Even their information that they were passing was not accepted because it was not accompanied with that particular knife. Now, what was very interesting is that this student then asked the question to the chiefs and the kings of these communities, 7 communities. He asked them, so what would we do with this knife that has been returned to Namibia? And the king said, what we would like to do is that you bring it to us, then we revive the processes of making it, but we would like to share that with the whole world. So after we are satisfied that we've replicated it for each kingdom, so that we can also revive the purposes that we were using that. So in other words, the kings were saying they no longer want to use stamps that they use on their letters. They want to send people with this particular knife because that is their tradition. But they would want to return the original knife to the National Museum of Namibia for the whole world to know about it, but to have more knowledge. They are going to return it with all this knowledge that has been collected so that the knife has got its life re-impugned. So I really am grateful that you asked that question, because I think it's extremely important for us to realize that repatriation should not end as an event, but there is the restitution, which means also restitution of knowledge. But this restitution of knowledge means also collaborative generation of knowledge with the communities of origin. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Goodman. I think colleagues, those who are online, you have learned something. Repatriation should not be an end of event where cultural objects have been returned, but we should emphasize restitution where we regenerate knowledge, where the young people should be involved particularly fully in this restitution process, picking the objects, going to communities, interacting. I hope, Barbara, your question has been responded to from Goodman. Let's hear from Syokau on the same question, because he wants also to hear that side about open restitution. Most of you are young women and you seem to be more active, youthful in the restitution work. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson. Thank you, Goodman. I think Goodman just answered it so well. The other hat I wear outside of my open restitution work is I am a curatorial fellow at the Denver Art Museum. And so, Barbara, to your question about how young curators coming up in the field, what they can learn about restitution, I think that it is a good idea for us younger curators to learn from the best practices of other people. So the example of Namibia, for example, and if we are learning from museums outside of Africa, I think that Native American curatorial practice is something we can learn from because they have been doing restitutionary work with their indigenous collections for, I don't want to say for longer than us Africans, but I think they have the policies in place that require museums to do repair work through the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act. So and for us here at the Denver Art Museum, one of the things we did is when we had a Benin bronze in our collection, and instead of returning it, we asked for the Nigerian Commission of Monuments and Museums to have a memorandum of understanding where we can put it back on view and use it to educate Denver's diverse publics on the history of Nigeria, the history of Benin, because also we recognize that if these belongings are not on display, non-African people don't get to learn about this history. So that's, I think that restitution is more than just return. It's about repairing what was lost. It's about coming together to collaborate in new ways that celebrate the rich history of Africans. So I think that is one way to do it as a Western museum. Now, for us as Africans, as Goodman has said, our national museums tend to actually perpetuate a colonial hierarchy. So the question for us as young curators coming into our national museums is how do we make them spaces that actually celebrate our diverse cultures? Because one of the problems of our African museums is we inherited a Western model that has never worked for how we remember as Africans. And I think community museums then actually do a better job of celebrating our diverse cultures than our national museums do. So how do we come together as curators, and how do we curate for multiple voices? How do we curate for multiple histories? And how do we move away from how sometimes our governments determine what culture we should celebrate? Like we do as curators, we have to recognize that we have the power to direct the histories that we tell about ourselves, and we can circumvent politics to do that. And as we come together in a national museum to tell a collective history of who we are as Africans in our countries, that is also a political act of resistance against our states, which tend to push for celebrating one culture over other cultures. So there's so much work we must do, but I think the biggest one is really us coming together to do the work of remembering differently, so we can build the countries that we want to see in Africa.
Wow. Wow. That has been a great, uh, great response from Goodman and Syokau. I think I've learned both of them have talked about repair and involving young people, and young people can contribute to multiple voices, and also trying to deconstruct the curatorial authority. I think it is very important for some of us who work as curators to understand that we inherit the work of colonial violence, where the labels of the objects in the museums are still held in that narrative interpretation of the colonials, and we are silent about it. We revise the archival text, and we have less voices of the communities and the naming of the objects right now, even if we want to present these things to the public to know more about it. I think it is a big challenge for us. But beyond the interpretation, how does the museums empower the communities in the restitution and these objects go back to the communities. I think it is very important. The curators have also a role in negotiating because they have access sometimes to these European museums through relationships, and because these European museums can hide information away from any public unless they work together with their fellow curators. So that's a big challenge. But one of my questions, which I wanted to ask as we wait for any public to ask another question is, do you think African museums have the capacity to undertake restitution? And if yes, good. If not, why? Any of you, Abraham, Syokau, and Goodman, please help us to respond to this question, because there has been an argument that Africans museums do not have capacity to handle issues of restitution. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me take up from there. Please, members, accept me. I just want, first of all, to appreciate the current speaker, that is Syokau Mutonga. She brought it very well that even our national museums require restitution, because some information which is there is very colonial. The colonial information is still being displayed 40 or 50 years after independence. So we need also restitution at the museums to the communities. Back to your question, Nelson, we are ready for the restitution. Why? Just imagine what is the representation of these artifacts in Europe? How are they being interpreted and how are they being used? So to me, I think it is better they are brought where they are treasured. Actually, some of them have made the African society to be condemned by looking at the artifacts, not knowing why they were used or made. So for that one, I support the restitution so much. Maybe we may assume that we may not have the capacity to handle the artifacts, but also remember that these artifacts were used, they were not there on display like the museums. Just remember the knife of Nyoro for the Sicilian bus. If it is brought back here to Uganda, maybe our doctors would study the system that was used for the Sicilian bus and improve on it. Look at the royal stool of Nyoro. It was used for enthronement. So if it is brought back, it is not going to be displayed in the museum. It is going to perform its own function. Maybe we may not have the proper care, like last time I looked at a drum that was picked from Busoga in 1897, and wondered if it was still here, if it would still be looking the same.
Okay.
That one requires concerted effort, and I think we can handle it, but this drum will be put to a proper use. What I fear is the misinterpretation and misrepresentation in European countries.
Thank you. Thank you, Abraham. There's a question from Timothy Washua Kisule. Please, can you ask your question as we will allow our panelists to give some of their comments? Thank you. Asked the question here, shouldn't restitution also involve giving the returned artifacts new meanings that speak to modern day concerns of communities, doesn't focus on the original meaning of an artifact, simply perpetuate the racist anthropological view that African culture is still stuck in time. Please, this is a useful question that I think members you can respond. Yeah.
Yeah, perhaps I can respond to that one a bit. I think
Goodman, you're on mute
We
again.
have lost your voice. Maybe you're muted.
yes, again, thank you, Syokau. It has happened again. No, I was saying that I think it is a very important question and an important issue to think about. The issue here is that when we are advocating for restitution, we are also taking into account the fact that culture is dead and things have changed over time. Hence, the example that I've given earlier that we've had situations where some culture that was returned was taken into the communities, which is very important as well to document these original uses. However, for it to be useful to and for it to speak to the youth of today, there is a situation whereby the youth have been inspired even to create new objects that have been inspired maybe by how an object looked like. Let me give the example of the knife that I was talking about. This knife comes with a sheath, and this sheath is a bit oval, and there are some youth that have been inspired by this sheath to develop some handbags that are in the shape of that knife and its sheath. But they are not using the original materials. That is why also perhaps we have avoided the question of authenticity and integrity in this case. But because then that allows creativity amongst the community, especially the youth themselves. But this is not only about the youth. Even those elderly people in the communities, they are facing some of these material culture after 100 years of material culture having been absent in the country. They are seeing it for the first time. Some they remember only having heard about it or maybe having seen it in some publications. So you see that in terms of the materials that was used to create these objects, some of those materials are no longer used. They've been replaced by other materials. So we should allow the returned possessions to have a life. And this life allows them to adapt to the new conditions in which they are. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that we need to ignore the original stories that were around it, because every possession, cultural possession, has got the physical and the spiritual and the intangible cultural heritage that is associated with it. So we also do not want to lose that history, but we are mindful of the fact that culture is dynamic. Perhaps I will end here for that question, then I'll answer Nelson's question about capacity after Syokau.
Thank you. Let's get to Syokau.
I think Goodman has summarized it perfectly, that because this idea, when we are asking for the return of our belongings, say original, okay, say it was taken in 1859. If it was taken in 1859, it is only original to 1859, meaning that in 1659 we were making something else. So the demand to have it back does not make us get stuck in time. It helps us to appreciate how we have been expressing ourselves through sculpture, through textiles, through art. And an example is with the Tuka mask of the Bamenda community in Cameroon. It was taken in 1957 and it was taken to France to the Musée Kiggenyi. And when they have been demanding for it, they went ahead and made a new Tuka mask a few years ago, but they still want that one back. So we're not we're not stuck in saying, if this thing doesn't come, we're not going to continue. I think the way we understand originality as Africans is very different from our Western understanding of originality, but that does not negate the fact that what is ours should be returned to us.
Absolutely. I think that is a very powerful message. When we talk about the original object, these objects, some of them will be handed from one generation to another. And when they removed it, there was disempowering, there was disconnection. And that disconnection, some of it affected our communities by disrupting the social structure system, by disrupting the continuity of knowledge. Even people who would create new products will not be able to make, because that original object was very key. Whereas we are continuing, especially, for example, in the Bunyoro, the stool which was taken was the one which will be handed from one generation to another. Even when another one was improvised, they still need that one, because the handing over through that stool was spiritual process that will allow continuity. So when they remove it, that means there's still a gap. Even 100 years, the Bunyoro kingdom still feels a gap. But the idea of youths being involved sometimes is to bring in their creativity, how they can continue to create new meanings, add new values, add new creativity, even income generating activities towards this project. I think our panelists have given a strong argument in that area. And also from Community Museum, where they say, we are the community, these original objects tries to empower us, try to enable us to understand our past and create stories that have been lost. Some of our information have been cut off because we missed some of the information memories through the objects. I think this has been a very powerful engagement which our panelists give. Members still have my response, which I think we will need to, as we get to close in the next 10 minutes, is Dr. Goodman. I think that area of museums, yes, we will need it. Yeah, that has been one of the arguments. Both, even our fellow colleagues will say, why are you returning these things? You don't have capacity to care for these objects. And yeah. And the Europeans will say, we have kept these things for you for long. And if they will be stolen. So yeah, maybe you can give your point of view on that.
Now, I think to begin with, that kind of question, of course, we have experienced it over many circumstances. And to be honest, I feel it is a denialist argument. It is an argument that tries to deny us our own cultural heritage. And I was once asked that question, that was in 2022, at the occasion of the return of 23 cultural possessions to Namibia from the Berlin Ethnological Museum. And I actually made a very carefree response to that. And my response was more of a retorting. And at that time, my response was, how prepared was Europe when they collected the belongings and even ancestral remains from Africa to their world? Where they, if we look at the 1890s that we're talking about, was Europe really prepared to look after these, or let me say European museums? Were they prepared to look after these collections that were coming, first of all, from very different contexts? Collections that by nature, they required specific climate control, right? Maybe even a simulation of the climates that they had here in Africa for them to survive. And yet they managed to they managed to prepare and care for these possessions for more than a century in some cases. How did they manage to do that? That is the question that we have here for over a century. What happened with Europe is that they created the capacity. And sometimes they did that through trial and error. So my view and my answer to that question is that, yes, Africa has some capacity to a certain extent. We cannot deny this. Otherwise, what are we saying here? What have we been training for over the past decades? We have the capacity. It might be not be seen to be at par with the capacity that is in other continents. But if Africa does not have that requisite capacity in terms of human resources and physical infrastructure to accommodate these returned collections, then Africa must build that capacity. That's what I would think we should do. Repatriation is in restitution that we're talking about now. These projects that we are preparing with our colleagues, in collaboration with our colleagues from Europe and the West, are very good opportunities for us to turn restitution into work of capacity building, into capacity building exercises. And this was demonstrated here in Namibia by this return of the 23 cultural possessions from the Berlin Ethnological Museums. What it actually did is that the Museums Association of Namibia that was driving this project, and all the other partners, communities, academics, and other museums, we ended up saying, okay, what do we want out of this particular restitution project? We want equipment. We want storage facilities. We want training in conservation. You know, we want to create jobs out of this. And what happened is that through this particular restitution project, we built in capacity building in terms of physical structure, infrastructure, and also human resources. So the argument that I'm making here is that the partnerships that we make with our colleagues who are holding these particular collections at the moment, and the partnerships that we facilitate, maybe as academics or as museums, with the communities from where these objects come, they should allow us to build capacity where is needed. In our case, the project even went beyond that. It created capacity in terms of training. For example, within that particular restitution, we ended up having 2 master's projects that came, in fact, 3 of them that came out of that, and also some training in conservation. You know, where through that project, we even have the very first qualified museum conservator in Namibia. Now, to conclude this for me, I would also want to say that, and I don't know whether this will be controversial enough, but
Yeah.
it doesn't really mean that Africa, and whatever Africa means, honestly, I don't know. But it doesn't mean that what we call as Africa does not have an iota of capacity. Perhaps what we need to do is to tailor it to restitution.
Okay.
And by the way, restitution should not only be from Europe, you know, from the West and Europe to Africa. Maybe we should also start thinking about restitution from Africa to Europe. There's quite a lot that was left here during colonialism, which does not belong. And
It does not belong to us.
Yes, if we do that, then we have to turn the question: does Europe have the capacity to manage these materials that are coming from Africa to Europe? But also at the same time, we should think about restitution between African countries and also restitution between African museums and their local communities. And once we start thinking along those lines, we will realize that we have the capacity. It has always been there. It needs to be activated.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Goodman. I know there's a burning question from Barbara. Barbara, can you precisely, we're left just with 5 minutes. If you can ask your question, I know our panelists also their time. Please ask and we close the session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So my question is to actually you, Dr. Goodman and Syokau. I'm interested, and also Mr. Kitaulwa. I'm very interested in knowing if I know like right now there is a lot that was taken and has to be brought back in order for us to get to reacquaint ourselves with our cultural heritage. But I'm also curious to know if the museums are also looking at what is important to us right now, like what are we using in our culture that we can start to put aside in the museums so that we can also sort of start to keep that instead of just looking so much into the past. And we're looking so much into the past to the point that if now, like 50 years from now, we are like, what were we doing 50 years ago that we can celebrate? But the 50 years back, we were looking at things that were stolen the other 50 years back. So are museums also looking at getting things that they see are important in the communities and sort of starting to highlight them and preserve them? That's my question. And my last one actually was, I would like to know, Nelson, what was the last artifact that was taken back to maybe like the Kigulu Museum, and how was that process like? Do you also start to ask the Kigulu Museum if they have the capacity to keep what they're asking back?
Okay, maybe I will just be briefly on the for the sake of Uganda Museum and what the restitution meant. We have practical examples when some of the objects were illegally acquired, confiscated at the museum, and they were very important for the kingdoms which are function and living. So such objects from 1993 were restituted back. Buganda, Bunyoro, Busoga, Toro. I remember I witnessed one, the one in the kingdom, which is in near Rakai, but Kochi Kingdom. So that one, at least I witnessed when the museum restituted back the regalia. So in Uganda, I think the restitution aspect has been ongoing. In regard to collecting, I think the new museological process we are working on is about how the museum, through its collections, all the knowledge which is within the community, can empower the society. So we can pick, we had an exhibition on milk, we curated with the communities, and information was put on display, and then the information was also moved throughout the country. We are recently working in partnership with the Makerere University and with the Community Museum Igongo and the Prometra, which is based in PG. That's ideally community on traditional medicine transition. As you recall, during COVID, how people went back to the idea of herbal medicine to help them in the scarcity of modern health practice to support in addressing health issues. So the museum currently, we look at we work with the communities when they share they need this idea or this knowledge, we conceptualize together, we find a way on how we co-curate. Our own, with my colleagues, most of the things which we try to do is about co-curation. We did some work in peace and conflict resolution, Northern Uganda. When there was conflict, we worked with communities, and some of the work ended up having community museums in Northern Uganda, memorial museums. So the museum, sometimes we try to work as a dialogue forum and engagement rather than just collecting for the sake of collecting. But if there's something that we feel within the society, we need to care for it, we are also working on that. But the idea is about what knowledge, at what kind of museum do we need, not about accumulating materialistic thinking of about capitalism, of collecting. that idea of colonial museum agenda. I think we are trying to move away from that rather than building museological knowledge, which empowers the communities to care for their heritage. I think that is my perspective I'll give. Maybe as Goodman, Kitaulwa can make summaries of their conclusion. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Nelson,
Now,
I just wanted to add on what you have just presented. Guzman, help me and I continue. We are also working with some universities in Uganda, working on the gastronomic heritage, where we have the Luombo and Kamalewa foods. If we promote these, I know this is what we call living heritage. We're also looking at the Matoput, a justice system that is worth adapting by countries. We are not only depending on the collection but we are also looking at the living heritage for sustainability and for income generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Abraham. Thank you. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I think to answer the last question about collection, I agree totally with Abiti when he talks about the fact that we are moving away from collection, just collection of objects. Of course, yes, museums are still collecting contemporary objects today, but it's being done in a very careful way because it's rather advisable, at least from our point of view here, to view museums as platforms where dialogue happens, as platforms where they make an impact within the community, but also considering the fact that before the introduction of the museum as an institution of collection, which, by the way, the institution, a museum was introduced, at least from our part of the world here, Southern Africa, and I think it's the same for other parts as well, that it was introduced as an institution that was collecting the peculiarities of the indigenous people and their cultures, not that the indigenous people or the local people were the audience, they were the subjects. It was an institution that was established to collect and assemble knowledge about the land, about the people, about the resources, as part and parcel of the colonial project, the imperial project that was there. But it doesn't mean that we didn't have something that was similar to a museum. If we look at our homesteads, even our own material culture was curated by our grandmothers. Those were, we didn't call it a museum at that time, but basically it was curated. It had the collections, they had a particular lifespan. If they died, and I'm using this word because I think they are not just objects, they've got a spirit and a soul. If they died, new ones were made. There was no problem with that. Those that could be passed on from one generation to the other for ritual and other purposes, they were also maintained within particular contexts that were not the kind of museums that we had. So I really agree with that, what Abiti's answer, that we kind of think of a museum in a different way, as a dialogue, as a platform for conversation, as a platform that capacitates our communities. Just in case I won't have a chance to really make a conclusion, I just wanted to make one concluding remark that when we think about restitution, let us be very intentional about that. Restitution is an ongoing process that requires that we learn and think together like we're doing today. But let us also ask ourselves, what led us to the point of discussing restitution in the first place? It is because we recognize that we've got some shared heritages, shared histories. So everyone should be involved and they should be involved right from the beginning. And my plea is, if we are doing this and we are doing it with local communities, let us include them right from the onset, and they must have decision-making power. These are some of the problems that we have experienced where, museum professionals, academics, they prepare these restitution programs, then they include communities at the end of it. They do not even involve them. I'm just thinking here about the Ghanaian academic Kodzogavua, who cautions us not to think of community involvement and consultation, but participation. They should participate equally, and they should have community. They should have what you call it. Decision-making positions in that, because this is a question of ownership at the end of the day. I thank you.
Ownership. I think you have made a good day. Let's hear from Syokau. I think you can conclude for us this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think to answer your question, Nelson, absolutely, Africans have the capacity to take care of what was taken from us. You don't ask the owner if they can take care of the thing they made. So, and Goodman and Mr. Abraham have also explained that. On to Barbara's question, I think that I agree with you that it is important to also collect contemporary artworks. And maybe the thing for us in our museum curatorial practice is, you see, sometimes how our departments are structured, they kind of continue to perpetuate this idea of a deep past and then a present. So sometimes you might find that our historical pieces are in the Arts of Africa gallery, and then the contemporary pieces are in the modern and contemporary gallery. And without immediately then the conclusion a museum visitor is drawing is that Africa is the place of the past, and then there's all these contemporary things happening. So how do we also, in our historical galleries, curate and exhibit in a way that shows that we have been here across time? Yes, there's that history, but even in this present moment, we are continuing to create, we are continuing to express ourselves through the things that we make. Yeah, and then how do we therefore curate to tell a bigger story that is celebrating our different cultures? And the community really is all we have, and that is the importance of, when we are
Have we lost Syokau?
I think we have.
Yeah, we have lost her. Okay. Yeah, I think she was just making the concluding remarks. And I think I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone, thank the panelists, Dr. Goodman, Syokau, and Ibra for your very wonderful contributions. This is a rich knowledge. I hope through Gothi we will keep this network and share this knowledge that has been with us and everyone. I want to thank you for your time. Thank you, Gothi Institute, Barbara, for organizing this event. I will hope we keep the network. And special from Namibia, colleagues who are here, we have learned so much. And we need to engage in this conversation. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. I want to close here. Barbara, back to you. If you have anything to share, I can leave there. Thank you very much.
No, I'm also here to just say thank you all for coming and engaging in this conversation. And just check our social media platforms for the rest of the events, because we are almost closing this project. So thank you so much for engaging with it. We shall see you soon.
All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, brother. Thank you for attending.
Thank you
Bye.
very much.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.